All right. Thank you all for being here once again. Um, my name is Tyler McDaniel. I work with Blueprint Kentucky and lead this monthly Brownfield Redevelopment webinar series. This June installment, Developing Your Site Reuse Vision, will be just about that, the site reuse vision component of the Brownfields planning process, Brownfields redevelopment process. So we're going to talk about site reuse vision. But we're also going to talk about some other components that kind of surround site reuse as well. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments, like if you can't see my screen, something's going on, please place those into the Q&A section, and I'll address those at the end of our presentation today, and hopefully we can have a nice little kind of Q&A and conversation about all this. This webinar is being recorded and posted to our Blueprint Kentucky YouTube page. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can check out our YouTube page, which houses our entire catalog of webinars. Those are about brownfield and sort of downtown revitalization topics that go back 2, 3, maybe even 4 years at this point. So a really robust lineup there with full of great information. And be sure to subscribe to us as well and share with your friends. So, all right. I am also having some camera technical difficulties today, so you will not see my head in the top of your screen. I'm not sure what's going on there, but my apologies. Um, but to get us into all this, if you're unfamiliar with the Brownfields Technical Assistance Program, it is a partnership between the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, their Brownfield office, which is in the Division of Waste Management, and us at Blueprint Kentucky. And we use this program to reach more communities, both virtually like this, but also on the ground through different types of events all over the state. We've just wrapped up a round of what we call Brownfield boot camps, where we have kind of a day-long workshop about brownfields, about some of the sort of engagement and planning components that we do, and it's sort of us at Blueprint and the Brownfield office at the state level kind of going back and forth, and it's a huge crash course in Brownfield tree development. We have one of those coming up in July, on July 29th, I believe, in Owensboro. So if you're in Western Kentucky or if you want to make a little drive out, please come and see us. We also are open to hosting workshops and technical assistance offerings as they come to us. So please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions that you might have, or if you want us to, come kind of lead a meeting around a building or something. I would be happy to come and help do some engagement around some of your sites. Uh, so in addition to that in-person stuff, we do these webinars. We also have our monthly newsletter, and just a lot of really great resources. So yeah, please reach out to us, for any questions you might have. So as we think about site reuse vision, kind of the basic, what is it? I think it's right there in the name, but it is the vision for how you will reuse your site. To think of it, the name backwards. So yeah, there are multiple ways you can go about figuring out what your site will become and articulating what your site will become. We at Blueprint Kentucky really like to lean into the idea that community voice and community need should lead all decision-making processes. And there are multiple strategies we'll talk about today for how you incorporate community need and community voice into your reuse vision. But it's also informed by a lot of other things, some environmental components, of course, if it's a brownfield, land use considerations, infrastructure considerations. It's really a bigger vision that is going to talk about what your site will become eventually. Um, but it's also sort of, there are elements of it as well that can be, that are site renderings. It can either be highly detailed, or just sort of informed by, kind of community choosing different components that they'd like to see around a property or a redevelopment. And of course, eventually you'll need those site renderings as you actually get your projects off the ground. But we do want to make the distinction that professional architectural and landscape design renderings are what you will need at that stage. And while some of these components can inform your site reuse vision and maybe get investors on board or strengthen an EPA grant application. They should not be a substitute for actual professional site renderings and architectural design. So just want to name that. And I will be saying that again multiple times throughout today. But within that, as you think about your site reuse vision, dream big and really start to think about what is feasible within sort of the market realities of the place that you live, um, and how all the pieces of your process are going to fit together within that. All that stuff we mentioned about environmental, infrastructure, land use, what each of those say, and how they can kind of go into your site reuse vision. So we're going to jump around a little as far as thinking about how we get there, how we get from point A to site reuse vision. Um, And we're going to start in the next few slides talking about site reuse planning, or also, uh, or this is a component of site reuse planning that is often also called site reuse strategy. And we will shortly talk about site reuse assessments. So a lot of similar language used across this, but I think two to keep in mind are that the reuse vision and the reuse strategy are often used interchangeably. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. And you'll want to really start thinking about this, of course, early on, kind of like pre your phase one or when you're getting your phase one done, and then pre your development phase of the remediation process. And at that point, once again, leaning into this idea that it doesn't have to be a detailed rendering, but that it's important to start thinking and dreaming. And I'm sure that, some of y'all, if you've dealt with properties like this before, you probably have a pretty good idea of what it could become and what the community might like to see it become and what the biggest needs are in the place where you live. But, while you can think about it long before you get to cleanup, by the time you get to cleanup, I think it's important to be a little down the road on thinking, what will your site become once it is cleaned up and sort of making sure that you have a really short window in between cleanup and actual sort of construction, keeping your costs low and things like that. Site reuse vision is a pretty big component of the EPA grants process. I'm going to dive into that later, and we're going to talk about some of the specific sections of the EPA grants that are involved. And then we'll talk about the scoring process within that as well, and how not having a robust site reuse vision can impact your scores in that process. I'm also going to share an example of a really good one from the Big Sandy Area Development District for an assessment grant that they put in a couple years ago. So you'll have an example to work with, and also, we're happy to provide other examples of successful language as well. And I think that this is also, once again, it's a great component to use community engagement to sort of set out a roadmap for how you move forward. Um, so think of this, as a roadmap and as a thing that will get you to a larger rendering down the road and give those designers something to work off of. Particularly if you have some of those kind of basic design processes and renderings already. But we will begin with the site reuse assessment. So, site reuse assessments, which can lead to your reuse strategy, your reuse vision, that's really an overall review of all of these different characteristics of your property. And that's where you're really kind of doing like the meaty homework and a lot of sort of the history and assessment work that goes on. And you can see here on the right, this is if you've ever come to one of our events before, you've probably heard us talk about the Revitalization Ready Guide. Is a really great tool, and it's hyperlinked here in the presentation for when you get this PowerPoint. But the reuse assessment has a whole section in that Revitalization Ready Guide that will walk you through a lot of these concepts on the left in depth, and give you some good pointers and considerations of who should be holding this work. and at what point it should be done. But as you're rebuilding out your site reuse assessment, you're really trying to, as the name suggests, you're trying to assess the conditions and get a good sense of how you need to move forward. And a lot of these things in here about like land use assessments, infrastructure assessments, figuring out market studies, feasibility analysis, some of that stuff that's really consultant heavy. A lot of these are eligible for coverage under the EPA Brownfields grants, particularly the assessment grants themselves, which, are um, you can do phase 1 with, but are also really great for kind of teasing out some of these other pieces and getting some money that you might bring in a consultant or an economist to get a good sense of like the property, what it might cost within the local market to redevelop the property, but also if you already have that vision in mind, how feasible that vision might be based on, local population, tourism, commuters in and out of the community, things like that. It's also here at Site Reuse Assessment a really great time to do your building inventory. It's building inventory is we always preach it as kind of the best first step that you can have, and you're also building a tool for longevity. But in this space, where you're doing your building inventory, you're doing site walkthroughs, where you're talking about the conditions of the building, can be a really good thing to get you ready for articulating your vision, particularly as you're teasing out what is the square footage of the building. Are there crumbling walls? Are there foundational issues? How is the roof? Is there infrastructure already in place? Does infrastructure need to be replaced? Things like that can be really great in this assessment phase before you get to the really cool, fun, big dreaming of the site reuse vision. So once you have your site reuse assessment and you're all squared away, and you can start thinking about who might use a property reuse vision as you're entering into this process. Well, a lot of people, of course, the standard answer. Um, but community leaders can use this, of course, once again, informed by community members, but leaders can use it to pitch to businesses, to pitch to developers or financial institutions, or, real estate brokers to say like, hey, this is what this site could become. These are the possibilities. What could our local economic development authority site here, on this site that is, once it is cleaned up? Designers, of course. I kind of mentioned this earlier that having some of these components already lined up based on what the community might want out of them can be really helpful for architects or designers, and particularly if if you want to bring them into your engagement processes, which we'll talk more about shortly. Um, Regulatory agencies as well, as you're moving through cleanup, as you're redeveloping, and you're dealing with, all the kind of different levels of maybe Department of Transportation or Department of Highways or whoever, or, forestry or even the higher level like EPA, having this sort of the reuse vision, all of your assessment, your site reuse assessment, and then sort of your cleanup strategies all aligned will be really helpful to not hit any snags along the way. Um, and then as you get into this, there are a lot of engagement tools to inform what that reuse vision could be. I think this is a really fun part of the process, and I'm excited to share about in a little bit. As far as you really just get people picking out very specific characteristics, and it's just fun. It's a really fun process to engage in, and a great way to make the community feel like it has ownership over designing a space, and that they have this sort of a long-term investment, and that they can see themselves in the reality of it. So there are also a lot of pieces. There are a lot of things that brownfields can become, right? And there are a lot of needs that exist within communities. So having these early conversations can really help you figure out like which one of these reuses is most desired, um, while the assessment can also help you figure out what's feasible. Um, so we often see this is sort of the five categories here that we commonly see brownfield sites redeveloped as. So we have green space here. So we're, parks, little, whether those are full scale parks that people, have playgrounds and the kids play in, or they're just sort of, maybe they have an amphitheater or benches or walking trails or whatever, just kind of green space generally. Our residential piece, a fair amount of housing we see developed on old brownfields. And we'll talk a little bit about this, the kind of continuum of, risk-based assessment and how much cleanup is needed, that can also sort of help as you're looking for your vision and you're figuring out like what your needs are to get to your vision. But residential can be really good if you have the cleanup opportunity, whether that's single family homes or sort of large scale apartments. We're seeing some of that across the state right now, particularly Maysville, Kentucky, got a large grant to clean up Hayeswood Hospital. I believe a $2 or $3 million EPA cleanup grant a few years ago to clean up an abandoned hospital that they are working on turning into around 40 or 50 affordable housing apartments. So that'll be a really huge boon for their downtown industrial sites. A lot of your old brownfields may have already been industrial sites. So that's it's kind of your fitting, retrofitting and or future proofing some of these sites again to bring them back to life as industrial centers. Mixed use, I think a kind of a combination of all these. Right, we would typically see a mixed use as like green space, commercial and residential, or green space and commercial, or commercial and residential, some combination of those. But commercial does tend to be the most common use. Communities want to grow their economies. They need spaces for new businesses to thrive. And commercial corridors and commercial development is often a really great way to do that. So as you're doing the assessment, and you're thinking about all of these things that could inform what your vision could become, just kind of want to think about these five buckets as you're thinking about vision. Really keep these in mind and hold them close, and have some conversations with community members and with your local economic authorities or whomever about which of these five uses do you need most of. And then when you're thinking about that, also keep in mind this idea of the risk-based assessment, that cleanup and remediation. It sort of works on this kind of continuum here where like residential, you're going to have folks who are spending a ton of time on these sites. You're going to need more cleanup. It's going to be a lot more involved. It's probably going to be a little more costly, and it's going to inform, what happens to any sort of contaminants that you might find. Whereas industrial, people are just really going to be there for work. There's going to be minimum exposure. There's going to be a lot of sort of safety controls in place already, as far as like different protocols that are enacted to keep the employees safe. So you might need less cleanup. And because people are engaging with different components of the site a lot less, you might be able to do a little more sort of like treatment in place as opposed to taking things away, which can kind of reduce your costs, depending on what it is. But keeping this in mind of this sort of this continuum as well as you're trying to think about like, okay, we want a park out of this, but we might need a little more cleanup. How do we factor that into our cost? So really trying to think of how you kind of, scaffold these things on top of each other as you're going in and planning. So some steps and strategies to getting to our site reuse vision. As we move from assessments into the planning phase, into the cleanup phase, um, we're once again thinking about the various uses of a property, right? What do you see in the long term for this space? And I want to also say that like it's really easy to get pigeonholed and really married to an idea. Um, but that it's okay to have multiple concepts or multiple ideas. So as you look at that continuum of ideas from before, and you're looking at your site and you're saying it's maybe, 3/4 of an acre, or we have this much square footage, maybe it could be this degree of, maybe it could be all apartments, or maybe we could do mixed use, or it could be strictly a park in a part of town that needs green space. Like it's okay to sort of have those multiple ideas or designs that you're kind of working with and thinking on. And then that's also a really great opportunity to have the community vote and kind of prioritize what they might need and what they might like out of each plan. Um, and as this says here, as you're making those concepts, you'll want to really hone in on what are the specific the buildings, what are the specifics of the places. I just mentioned like acreage, square footage, but also thinking about like what is the infrastructure? Is your site accessible by foot, by vehicle if need be? Are there sidewalks? Are there parking spaces? Also, infrastructure more broadly as we think about it, electricity, um, stormwater, wastewater, plumbing, all those types of things. Are they there? Do they need to be replaced? Like, do you have to get lead pipes out? Is that contributing to whatever the contamination might be? And then the impact and relationship with the surrounding landscape. Is it a wooded area around you, or is it on the border of a neighborhood? And how does both the cleanup and the reuse impact that? Particularly if you're in a neighborhood, if there are people living close by, um, really bring them into this process and let them know that you value them as neighbors, and would really like their sort of feedback on helping determine what these places can become as you're articulating your vision. And at this point is where you'll really start to bring up some rough sketches, or draft some basic descriptions of what your site could become. And, also leaning into your building inventory for this is you're plugging things into tools to say, like, we have this much square footage to work with, and like we have these buildings with this damage that could maybe be saved, but maybe these buildings can't be saved. And, really kind of treating this as kind of your puzzle making phase and a time where the information is just like building upon itself once again. So I am a really big fan of maps, of visualizations, of kind of using visual tools to help us figure out what these things might be and what they might look like. I think that those tools are really helpful, like to just, I don't know, with different types of learning and different types of imagination. I think when I see something and I can, put a cutout of a building onto an outline of a property, it helps me start to be like, oh yes, this could be this thing and not just a vacant lot. Um, and once again, kind of leaning into that idea that if there are different levels of what can and can't be developed, to lean into a mixture, to think that you don't have to be all in on one thing, right? And how can we combine maybe certain elements, um, into one another? And also thinking about these different pieces, like here, this mention of undevelopable areas. Thinking about like floodplains, I think are a pretty common one now in Kentucky, unfortunately. And as we think about buildings that are in floodplains and that may be potential brownfields, and as we remediate those, those are probably more likely really good opportunities for parks, for orchards, for trees and green space, for walking trails, things like that. Um, and once again, just like maximize your assets, like control what you can. And by that, we mean maximize what you have available on site and through your site and nearby at your site. Once again, leaning into that piece, what is the infrastructure, and who are the neighbors, the key players that are going to be impacted and who might use the space, but also thinking about, um, you know, what is a multi-pronged approach within that to move it forward, under what, with the tools that you have. So thinking about those infrastructure pieces and thinking about the neighbors, is there a way to get the neighbors out, and have them walk around if it's safe to walk around the perimeter of the property and talk about like, are the sidewalks safe? Are there thoroughfares for pedestrians or for traffic, or does it end at a fence line? And like those kinds of things, like really thinking of how we can involve all of our pieces together. So as you are moving towards this and all the big picture stuff is way up in the clouds, some good tools to bring this all together. Oh, I think I forgot to mention this over here, in the last slide. This picture on the right here. This is from some engagement work we did in Blueprint Kentucky did in Manchester, Kentucky. And so this was sort of a building inventory and working with some different sites that they had around the town. And you can't really see it that well in this picture, in this version of the picture. But there are some potential properties outlined. I believe those are the red ones. And you'll see these pictures all along the screen here. Um, are a mixture of pictures of those buildings and of those potential like parcels of land, with the ability for folks to sort of prioritize which sites they think are the most important and to make notes about what they would like to see some of those sites become. Um, and that's just kind of one tool for reworking uh, some of these sites and getting community input around, like maybe this building would be great for commercial, but you think it would be great for commercial, but then someone else comes in and they're like, actually, I think this would be really good for like a small scale factory or a business incubator, something like that. Some other engagement strategies, and really the place I think that one of the places we like to start a lot of times in our work is this idea that just simple questions give you really big answers and um, give you a direction to go in and kind of help to ground you into what the community's vision is of either a site or a particular area. Um, we do this with just like really simple questions, that are listed here. What do you love about your town? What are the biggest needs or issues? And I think in the needs and the issues piece is where we can really start to think about how these properties um, can come back to life. Like, what do people need the most? What are the biggest issues? Maybe it's a recovery center. Maybe there's no grocery store, things like that. And what do you wish that was in your town that isn't here already? I really love the question of what does your dream town look like in 10 years? Like, so getting people to really get outside the box and say like, if anything could be done here, what would it look like? And I think you get a lot of really, really interesting and revealing answers through that question. Uh, but through these questions, once again, not only can you highlight your community need and start thinking about how your site reuse might be informed by community need, but you can also think about if it is something as broad as commercial, then you can start to look at, what do people wish was in the town or what do they love about the town and start to think like, okay, well, these are the things that people love and that they want here and where are the intersections that we can then put into this version of this site. We do this a lot of different ways. We sometimes use big paper notepads, but we also have these on the left. We used to use this called Chalk and Talk, which is really great to set up at a community festival. It's a three-sided board that you can build, and you write a prompt on each side, and people can draw pictures and write messages and answer the prompts or whatever. And it's a really great, fun tool just to get folks interacting with the space, in places that they normally might not get to. So once you kind of move beyond that piece and you've got maybe your properties are identified, if you want to get a little more in-depth and involved on some of this. These are two really great strategies or these sort of design events. And I have kind of two here. There's the community design one, which is much easier to do, um, on a smaller scale with a little less experience or with someone, like a Blueprint Kentucky, we can come in and kind of assist in something like this. And then the professional design events that you might have more of your landscape architect, your designer, whoever coming in, that's actually giving you the renderings. And so maybe someone you paid for and they want to check their work with the community that the community can then say, well, this does work, this doesn't work, this is why, and then prioritize the pieces that they think are the best. In the community design charrettes, I talked a little bit about that Manchester one where we use reference pictures of the buildings themselves. This picture, this top picture here, I believe is actually also from Manchester, and it was leading the redesign of a small little pocket park in town. And on this table here, there are these reference pictures of all kinds of different green spaces in different towns. And you print all these pictures off, and then you let folks make notes on sticky pads underneath of them about what components of that design they like, if any. And then from that information, you can say, like, in our reuse vision, as this becomes a pocket park, it will include X number of benches or shrubs or trees or playgrounds or whatever. So kind of using design elements that exist elsewhere to help you articulate what your site will become. I also love maps. Like you'll, as you build out your site inventory, it's hugely beneficial to put that information into a map of some sort, whether it's like an ArcGIS map or a Google map or some other kind of third-party software that I don't know about. But really having that visual, and you can, print those off and do really cool, fun, interesting things with them. Um, and yeah, utilizing things really that people can play with. Our director likes to use Legos a lot so that people can kind of build and design their own versions of places and what they would like to see in them. Um, and that can just be really fun and creative, and also a little funky sometimes. Um, So these can also be highly detailed once again, or just very basic elements. I think, a lot of these programs and projects uh, are more conducive to those smaller elements, and just having people say what they like and dislike about something, and then using that in your writing. Um, some of this piece on the left here, the picture or the one on the right, excuse me, the picture on the right, the design your own site concept is actually from this is from a community engagement session that I went to here in Lexington, Kentucky, for the downtown master plan. And you can see sort of a combination of multiple of these ideas here. This was led by the planning department here. And so they printed off this map of the downtown and these uh, multiple sites in the downtown. And this one here is just two parking lots. And they wanted you to play with this idea of if you were to redevelop these parking lots into something else, what would it look like? And they gave you these little pieces to put on the board where you could kind of design your own little new structure here. And this is the one I designed. A lot of, some really big parking garages, and then a mix of homes in there and businesses. And it becomes like a fun little puzzle to work out. Um, so yeah, if you have the resources, that can be a really great thing too. And particularly if you're able to like calculate square footage and try to make it really accurate, and can be hugely helpful to hand off to an architect or designer to say like, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking for this space. So I'm about to throw a lot of information at you, and I promise I will not read these sections to you in full, but will instead just kind of draw your attention to various components of them. These are actual sort of scored portions of the EPA grant. And I pulled these from the cleanup section, but these concepts with very similar language and some variation in scoring are also present across the EPA grants, Assessment Coalition, community-wide assessment, and multi-purpose, all of those. Um, so this is not necessarily a scored piece that I'm showing you right here, but this is in the program description that really articulates site reuse vision and the necessity of that. So this bold part here being a vision for the cleanup, reuse, and redevelopment of brownfield sites, and a strategy for leveraging resources to help accomplish the vision. So even right here in the program description, you can see them referencing a vision, a vision for cleanup, a vision for reuse, a vision for redevelopment. So once again, the site reuse vision being an incredibly important piece of this, that you will have to articulate if you want to proceed with an EPA grant of any type. So as we get into the like nitty gritty of each of those sections, a few sections here that I just want to call attention to and touch on where this shows up. The project area description and plans for revitalization section, which is 55 points total. So this first one, revitalization of the target area, this is going to be where you really have a chance to articulate and describe your site reuse vision and what your site will become one day. And I've bolded these kind of specific components in here where there's mention of that language. Um, but this also, is a good time to think about some of the other plans that may exist in your community. Do you have a land use plan? Do you have a comprehensive plan, a downtown revitalization plan? And how does your reuse strategy play into the broader mission and vision of your community? So essentially saying that this site is going to push your community towards achieving its goals. The outcome and benefits of reuse strategy. This is also in that same section, is 10 points, and you'll see it again here. The degree to which these outcomes clearly correlate the applicant's reuse strategy and projected site reuses. So here we go again, with a lot of language harkening back to things we've talked about already. What is your reuse strategy? Is it a single site? Is it multiple sites? And also up here, this piece that's underlined back to the sort of the five different areas of common reuse. We see a park, a greenway, undeveloped property, recreational property, other property. So leaning into this idea of, what are we cleaning up and what can it become that kind of fits into these parameters. And across these two sections here, where site reuse is pretty prominent, is you can see it accounts for 20 of 55 total points in this section. So to not have a fully articulated site reuse in this section could cost you, almost half of your scoring points, which could completely, derail your EPA grant application. You'll also find it in the community need and community engagement section here, um, in the health or welfare of sensitive populations. And here you see talk about the target area and the reuse strategy, and how those will identify and reduce the threats. So this is particularly helpful too if there is, like I mentioned earlier, if there are neighbors abutting the site, bringing them in, really understanding their concerns and their needs, the things that are impacting them. If you find anything in cleanup, if you can tie that into something that happened on the site, that can be really helpful in these sections, as far as saying, like, once we clean everything up out of here, and this will be a commercial corridor, and it'll help with, health outcomes and access to foods or entertainment or whatever. But so these two sections here, each count for five, so 10 points each in this. And then this economically impoverished, disproportionately impacted population section, also 5 points. Once again, mentions your population and how the reuse strategy is going to address issues within the population. So here's another instance where this section, your reuse strategy plays into 15 out of 35 points. So once again, almost half. Um, and, shows once again that proper reuse strategy and vision can really make your application incredibly strong, and really help funders see what this would become and show that you're doing your due diligence and planning, and that you understand all of the components surrounding assessment, community engagement, liability protections, cleanup, and how that your end use vision is going to consider all of those within that. So these next few slides are going to be the successful grant example that I mentioned, from the Big Sandy Area Development District Community-Wide Assessment Grant that they got in 2022. I posted or pasted in here their reuse strategy and alignment with revitalization plans section. I'm not going to read all of these slides to you, but you'll receive them later, like I said, if you want to really dig into them. I've bolded the parts that I feel like are most relevant, as they talk about site reuse and they talk about community need. They really, right off the bat, lean into their site as a catalyst site, um, or their four sites rather, since there were multiple listed, and it was an assessment grant for the entire region that Big Sandy serves. But thinking of the sites as catalyst sites, so that sort of these sites that will quickly become serve a greater good, and that can also be sites from which other redevelopment spawns off of, and how they're going to meet those community needs. And then, in which case, they go on to define what those community needs are: housing and employment. And then they mention the tools, the inventory, community needs assessment, and then getting specifically into the sites themselves. You can also see in here where they mention adequate parking, residential zoning, all of these components that we were talking about earlier, right? So thinking that they're considering how these properties are currently zoned, if there might need to be more rezoning, what that all looks like as they're moving forward in cleanup. And also mention in here of, the condition of the properties and how that could impact like potentially selling the buildings once they're cleaned up or whatever. And then moving on more in here, they pull in some of those outside plans, like I mentioned, comprehensive economic development strategy that's updated annually. Uh, and that is a program that, or a study rather, and plan that all area development districts should have, I believe. And there should be community input within that. So that could be a really good jumping off point too if you're lost in your community needs portion of this and thinking about how do we move forward. But kind of using that to say like, oh, well, these are the improvements. And then over the next two slides, you can see how they really wrap in different goals from that strategy into their reuse here. So quality of life improvement, mentioning housing stock and the specific sites that will meet the demand of the housing site. Housing stock. That's a tongue twister. And the catalyst sites as well. So you see this really cool breakdown here, like highly detailed of each site, what each site offers. Site 5 being a vacant lot, it's a former hospital, right? And then how that can be redeveloped. So there's a mention at the bottom to the Maysville project that I mentioned earlier. People are very excited about it. Um, but you see here once again how they're thinking about sites, they're thinking spatially, and they're articulating space how spatially they could become something else based on community need. And even more here, more of the sites they mention. Um, where they're positioned. They're surrounded by additional brownfields, how they might partner with the IDA, the Industrial Development Authority, to serve as business incubators. So thinking broadly about partnerships too in the long term and what that might look like. Um, and then the quality of life improvements, once again, down here, uh, how they directly tie into Paintsville's land use and revitalization plans. So then going away from the broad plans into the very site-specific plans, and how these are going to also lead to things that you see here: beautification, litter abatement, natural environment protection, things like that, So once again, I think this leaning more into the green space and the parks component, but also you could bring those design elements into businesses or housing or whatever through, water retention and having community members like identify that they might want, water retention interventions or trees or shrubbery or whatever. So all that being said, as you move forward in this and you're thinking about community need and vision, uh, it's always important to consider your liabilities and the risks that are associated with each vision. Leaning into that idea again that you can have multiple options for site reuse with similar components, like as you're working through this, but kind of combining them all down into one and trying to, be as detailed as possible. But if your environmental liabilities, thinking about like federal and state statutes or regulatory programs, um, and like how those could be potentially liabilities, based on whatever is found in the long term. So leaning back into the that continuum of what needs more and less cleanup. If a site needs a ton of cleanup, once again, you don't want to put a house on it, right? That's an environmental liability. The financial risks and liabilities, thinking about like your costs, and that could be related to the environmental cost, or it could be related to like developing and maintaining the property itself. Um, So the cleanup stuff, it could be demolition, it could be like operation of some of those controls if you're treating in place. It could be monitoring, it could be site upkeep and maintenance in the long term. Once again, considering those financial risks throughout the entirety of the process. So while you're cleaning up and within what it will become and who's going to own it, who's going to pay taxes on it, things like that. And then community issues, once again, like bringing folks in, if they have been impacted by a site, they're probably going to have some opinions and thoughts and trauma around that site and things that it has maybe caused them. Or even if it's just been blight for a long time and they finally feel like they can tell someone that it's blight, those issues will be raised undoubtedly. But it could also be the physical state of the property, and concerns they have about that, or the environmental treatment, and how it might impact them as the site is being cleaned up. So once again, thinking about that, thinking about keeping your site safe during cleanup, so folks aren't in there, in contaminated materials or anything. Um, so yeah, consider liability throughout the entirety of your process and into your site reuse and what will the liability be in the long term. Community need, once again, leaning into that thing that's like, do you need housing and treatment centers, or does your community really want like a tiki bar? You know, figuring out the market conditions of your place, the business conditions, proximity to business districts, housing, anything else. We probably wouldn't want to put a recovery center in an area where there are a lot of bars, right? So thinking about community needs and situation and that. Consider community-led design. I'm telling y'all, it's super fun. You'll love it. It's really expansive and eye-opening. We talked about once again the multiple reuse visions, and I want to mention again before we close that this is not a substitute for professional architectural renderings, once again, but it can help inform them. Um, and it can be fun, for architects, for landscape designers to have some tools and some things to go off of that they then have to work with them instead of starting from scratch. Uh, and once again, that market viability and financial cost. Outside of the liabilities, think about the long term. What are the rents going to be? What are the leases going to be? What's the property tax that people are paying or occupational tax? Who's paying that? Who owns it? What is the cost to build? Really trying to build out those financial projections, which once again are eligible costs under EPA grants. And then once you have your reuse vision and your plan, then you get to bring it to reality. You can go through the multiple phases of cleanup, assessment and cleanup rather, work towards, either continuing ownership or transferring ownership to a new entity or selling off, and just getting to bring it to life. Is really exciting. People want these types of projects to succeed. They have a particular sort of longing and dedication to these old buildings in the places that they live, and can be really excited when they see them coming back to life. Because it means that, there's a part of them that gets to live on with this space and their relationship to it. So, all that being said, uh, any questions that y'all have about site reuse vision, how to talk more about reuse vision with your community, I am open to questions. Feel free to throw those into the Q&A section. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions pop up immediately, but maybe they're really long questions. Um, but if there are none, I want to thank y'all again for joining us today. Once again, my name is Tyler McDaniel. You can reach out to me at any time to ask about any of these ideas. If you're really into the idea of a design charrette or community-led design and you would like to bring that into your community, please reach out. We would love to talk to you about that. We'd love to talk to you about community engagement, any ways that you can involve people in the process or even help you navigate sort of the technical pieces of the brownfields process, even if that's, applying for a phase one with the state or applying for an EPA project and funding, whatever you'd like. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all. And I am now going to give you 8 minutes of your day back. And I hope we talk soon.